There is a really high chance that you have heard about Dune in the past few years, as it is probably experiencing its major peak of popularity in the most recent years with the release of the two movies that were directed by Denis Villeneuve. In simple words, Dune is like a franchise that uh, is set about the world of the planet of Arrakis and the control of the spice that is produced therein. Dune is a series of books that a lot of people might have heard about, but not as many people must have read. And if they have heard of it, it is very likely that they couldn't get past through the very first book. It came out during a time when sci-fi was considered inferior literature. But with time, people started to realize that there was a lot of value in the world that Frank Herbert, the author, created that paralleled a lot with our daily lives. It is for a very good reason that people consider that Dune it is to science fiction, the same that The Lord of the Rings is to to fantasy. Even though the most important plot point, the most important element of Dune are its politics, it is also important to notice that its commentary about technology, what he got right, what he got wrong, it's also very present throughout the whole novel. And they also talks about many technologies that are still in development that we see currently in our modern lives. One of the brilliant things of sci-fi as a genre is that it oftentimes is older than we realize. For example, Isaac Asimov, which is one of my favorite authors, and one of the most prolific authors in the genre of sci-fi, published his most important works in the 1950s, and Herbert Dune released his during the 60s. This is important to point out because when you read, you realize that there are so many pieces of technology that are described in these books, that we use in the modern day, even though the authors were using pen and paper and as much a typewriter to make these stories. One of my favorite authors, Ray Bradbury, in his novel Fahrenheit 451, describes a piece of technology that seems to be very reminiscent of an Earbud because it's a tiny little piece that you insert in your ear, and you can use that to communicate and hear what the person on the other end is saying. For example, in two TV shows, Star Trek first, there is the communicator, which is a piece of technology that really resembles a flip phone, which was a piece of technology that was greatly used back in the 2000s. And in Doctor Who, another show, there is an episode where technology that can generate pictures and art is described. That episode was released in 1979 and Star Trek was released in 1966. So these shows are very old, but they get so many of the modern things that we use very right. But coming back to the novel that I'm talking about, June takes a more important, a more interesting approach than most other notable sci-fi works. It does showcase some important pieces of technology, like for example the use of holograms, which they use to examine the surface of planets that they're trying to invade or do whatever. They, for example, as you can see from the cover, the planet is a desert planet. So in the book, they describe a type of suit that is specifically designed to conserve the moisture underwater of the body. They use force shields, which is a very common sight in sci-fi, and ornithopters, which is like a very interesting piece of technology that is in the real life. It's only hypothetical because it probably wouldn't work, but it's like a type of flying machine that resembles the way a bird flaps its wings. I think it's very interesting. But even though it does showcase that those pieces of technology, the most important thing about Dune is the artificial intelligence and the robots, or to say it in a more accurate way, the lack of them. Creation of machines that resemble the human body and the human likeness of the mind in general are completely forbidden. In the world, in the past times, this novel is set 20,000 years into the future, and it is described that in the past, probably closer to or modern times, uh, computers were used to control what people thought because people were starting to be too dependent on artificial intelligence and technology. This is why they had Butlerian Jihad, which is a term that they use to describe the rebellion they had against machines. And that's when they prohibited the creation of any machine that resembled the human mind. This is very interesting because artificial intelligence is a topic that is constantly arising in the discussion. Some people are very excited about the development of these new tools, and some other people are very averse to it. I have to admit that I am very averse to them. It is not that I am completely against them. I see many risks in the use of this technology that I think that so many people are not taking into consideration or don't care about. I think it is very dangerous that we are allowing a new generation of people to have this tool that grants whatever information they need without they ever questioning the origin of this information, without ever taking the time to check that all the information that the AI, the artificial intelligence, granted them is accurate. And that is not even taking into consideration the possible bias, the possible political campaign and bias that the people who make these kind of tools could put into the development of them. Like Elon Musk is every day in the conversation, and it is so obvious that any piece of technology that he might put out is going to be biased somehow. But I'm not saying that we should completely abandon these technologies. I think that we should use them, but just in a way that is more moral, ethical, and a way that doesn't contribute to the weakening of the human mind. I think that outside of its political and environmental messages, one of the most important things that we can learn from Dune is not being completely dependent on technology in a way that we would ever need a Butlerian Jihad or a great revolt in real life. That's what I think.